Let's go. All right, so hello everybody, boys and girls. This is for you shitty MLs out there. I love you all. You're my favorite. This is the first episode of my attempted podcast here with my good friend here, Wesley,
Hey.
and my future guests that we'll have on eventually from high school as well as friends from other locales of the Indiana wildlife. So this one we're going to call Indiana, a case study in why you shouldn't try to industrialize your giant Native American burial grounds. Essentially, I'm going to start off just by introducing us to you guys. I'm Austin, and I'm from Southern Indiana, as well as my friend Wesley here. Went to the same high school, went to the same just town where there is nothing but fields, rednecks, Republicans, and just general sadness.
Yeah, if you work at the Sonic here, you see like the kind of trucks these people have. I once saw a guy roll up in a truck with like LED lights all over his wheels that changed color and a massive Confederate flag sticking out the back. It was hilarious.
Essentially, Southern Indiana is the modern Republican state. We are the South's proxy state almost.
The Mississippi of the North.
We are the Mississippi of the North. But yeah, so Wesley is a bit more in depth into the leftist side of things than I am. While I have been a self-described socialist since about my junior year in high school, so going about 3 years, about 2 to 3 years now. Wesley, I think, has been around. It has about the same time period, but he's about a year or two older than me, so he's a bit around longer. So I am a syndicalist, but not iron to that. I do subscribe to a lot of ML thought. Wesley, yeah. I think, is a full ML, if I'm correct.
Yeah, like ML, but I do I'm willing to work with Maoists. I agree with a lot of Maoist ideology. I think that syndicalists are cool. I just think that it's kind of a dead ideology, and I don't feel like it's worth latching onto.
Essentially, Wesley is a bit more concrete, while I'm kind of the floating leftist, where I haven't fully made a decision yet because I haven't read enough theory. But don't crucify me yet. I will read theory. Just haven't had the time. Okay, so as the podcast suggests, we are the virgin lands of the Midwest. We are the fields. we are the hellhole. So essentially this podcast is going to cover what it's like being weird-ass leftists in the middle of Republican cornfields. Essentially, but...
Ugh.
Where we're going to start with this today is this is going to be a podcast essentially describing the history of the state and what it means to us and how it is almost a case study in postmodern irony and how this place works. Postmodernism is a sham, but the one thing I will take is irony is a great concept. So essentially, the first thing we need to talk about is Indiana. Where are all the Indians? If there are no Indians that you can find, that's because they're either buried in the ground or they have been shipped out to Oklahoma.
Rip.
So essentially the 5 main tribes before Columbus, before mass death, were, from what I have been told over the years and what I have found, has been Shawnee, Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Iroquois. Most people know the last 2. Those are pretty big ones in the American mythos. You know, you've met them at the landing of Plymouth Rock. So Iroquois, the funny story with the Iroquois is actually that they weren't native to here, but they had actually encroached in here and pushed a lot of these smaller tribes out or integrated them. And a lot of these small tribes either went to the Shawnee or they stayed with the Iroquois. But the thing I like to talk about with the Indians is that before Columbus appeared there and met... Well, technically Columbus didn't appear there, but before the English got to them, let us say, they are pretty big as being cooperatives with the French. And so that's why Indiana is very much a French state in naming. Like, we have ourselves Vincennes, we have Dubois County, but no one's ever going to call it that.
We just call it Du Bois.
Yeah, it's Du Bois. Yeah, it's Du Bois County. I've lived there. Du Bois County is no longer French. Don't ask them, are they French? They are definitely not. They are Germans, and they might crucify you. They're still Catholic, though. Don't worry. But essentially, under the French, be it what they may, even though there still was a profit incentive with the French colonization of the regions. It was mostly a profit motive that would make them more inclined to cooperate with the natives to acquire furs. We very much were a large trading hub due to our proximity to about 5,000 different rivers, mainly the Ohio, the Missouri, Mississippi. They all have we all lead into them that are pretty close by. We also have the Wabash, and then, yes, the Great Lakes. We have access to them. So the French use this as a major trading hub. Now, that all fell apart with what I like to call, the British decided to go to Pound Town. And with the British colonization following the the French Indian War, so Americans, and technically British colonists, but future Americans, because this continued, had decided we're going to move west. And so with the move west, you now have all these colonists moving into these regions, because let's just point out, Indiana did not matter in the Revolutionary War. The only thing the Revolutionary War did in the state of Indiana was, I believe there is a general, like a brigadier general, maybe a colonel, I don't remember his name entirely, but I think it was ending in green. I'd have to find it real quick. But essentially he did a lot of raids in the region into the south, and he was what I like to call the U.S. Army Rangers, but Revolutionary Edition. They were just a bunch of conscripts that he had gotten, trained with rifles, and sent out into the middle of the woods to not die and freeze to death. And just messed with the British and fought Indians that were friendly to the British. Now, what this moves into with that loss in the future, I believe starting in around 1800, you had the start of who I like to call William Indian Murderer Harrison. So I'm going to pass this to Wesley real quick while he gives us a quick read from an excerpt from what I like to call People's History of the United States. And this is a great section talking about why William Murderer Harrison is a good guy to talk about.
All right, so this is from People's History of the United States, and we're reading from section 7 of, okay, I don't know what chapter this is, but I believe this is the paragraph you want to read. But as whites continued to move westward, the pressure on the national government increased. By the time Jefferson became president in 1800, there were 700,000 white settlers west of the mountains. They moved into Ohio, Indiana, Illinois in the north, and Alabama and Mississippi in the south. These whites outnumbered the Indians about 8-1. Jefferson now committed the federal government to promote future removal of the Creek and the Cherokee from Georgia. Aggressive activity against the Indians mounted in the Indiana Territory under Governor William Henry Harrison.
So, William Henry Harrison, future president of the United States for less than a year. Less than 6 months, actually.
Rip.
May he rest in piss.
Critical support for pneumonia.
Critical support for pneumonia. Yeah, that's a good way to go out. Essentially, where I am currently living is what I like to call his giant memorial county. I live in Tippecanoe County as of right now, and it is a county of Native American death. It is where all the major battles in this state took place against the natives, all the massacres. The names for streets are insanely messed up. Half these streets around this area are actually named after either random religious objects, like random religious prophets, people within the Bible, etc., and named after random Indian tribes who are now no longer living in the state. Like, I drive around this county, and one of the things I found is there's an actual suburb near me where all the roads are Miami Trail, Delaware Trail, Potawatomi Road, Iroquois Street. They are all just named after these just murdered natives without a care in the world. There are, I believe, 3 separate trails of death in this county. In this actual metropolitan city area that I'm in, there are about 3 of them, if I'm correct. It is insane. It is absolutely terrible. With these battles, it's very hard to get information about this because most of the information gathered on Indiana history has been through our horribly corrupt history books through schooling that I have had to personally try and debunk to my teachers, where they once labeled one of the massacres by Harrison as a battle of women and children, which is mind-blowing to me that you can label it as that.
Yeah,
But,
those women and children were like totally like armed soldiers, not just civilians.
yeah, essentially they pulled the Palestinian move where they threw a rock. So they are now labeled as enemy combatants. But
Oh shit! Now we're gonna firebomb their neighborhood.
But so the original Indian territory before it was called Indiana encompassed, I believe, a very small section of Ohio, all of Indiana, parts of Illinois, parts of Michigan, and I believe a little bit of Wisconsin, as well as give or take Kentucky. The modern borders are a bit iffy because most of them were based around rivers, so they're pretty concrete now, but back then they were very iffy. We did not become a state until 1816, with Vincennes being our territorial capital till then. In 1800, this increase is insane. So from 1800 to 1860, we increased by over 1.1 million people. We went from 2,000 settlers in the year 1800 to 1.3 million settlers by 1860, so right before the horrific Civil War. Which leads us into, personally, okay, wait, before we get into that, we do have, and I'm going to let Wesley take this on, New Harmony is in what he likes to call the comrades who didn't read enough future theory.
Yeah, I mean, they really should have read more Lenin. Like, it doesn't matter that he wasn't alive for another 100 years or something like that, but, like, they still should have read Lenin. So, New Harmony was a former Lutheran colony called Harmony that was purchased by this guy named Robert Owen. He was like, okay, we're gonna, like, create a communal utopian society. It failed economically within 2 years, but it had lasting effects on American society. For example, it became a center for academic and scientific research and built one of the first freely accessible public libraries in the United States. They also had a civic drama club, and their public schools were accessible to both men and women, like they were non-discriminatory. Owen's sons later became prominent voices in the early American scientific community, especially geology. Like, they're big names if you look them up. And New Harmony later became the second headquarters for the U.S. Geological Survey.
So the thing with geology, for those who are unfamiliar with this hellhole of the Midwest, geology is a very huge thing in this region for the scientific community. That is because we were both destroyed by the glaciers and barely avoided being destroyed by the glaciers, all in one breath. And we were part of the ancient seas. Prince, there is a very large fossil record, not of the dinosaurs or anything, that's not that, but of like plants and sea creatures that from thousands of hundreds of thousands of years ago we have in this state, because we have what is considered to be one of the perfect constructs of limestone sediments, sedimentary. We have the best combination of sedimentary and metamorphic rock in this area. But so with New Harmony out of the way, I do want to talk about what I like to call Indiana being the Union elite, otherwise known as we are the burning Shermans. So we
Burn it down.
Burning. We're gonna burn down Atlanta, and that we did. So the biggest thing about Indiana that people point to about the Civil War is that we are one of the three homes of Abraham Lincoln. So the Midwest is very competitive with each other, and this is something I'm going to get into later, but essentially all Midwestern states hate each other for no reason. And one of the things that is contention...
Kind of like Yugoslavia.
Yeah, essentially, yeah,
we're all the same, but we hate each other for no reason.
Yeah, the Balkans, we are the Midwest is the Balkans of the U.S. But so Abe Lincoln was not born here, but he spent most of his, I believe it was from a very young age of, I believe, around 6. I could have that wrong. It's been a very long time since I've read about him. I personally am not a fan of his standards sometimes. But essentially, he spent most of his young adult life here. That's the general gist. Before he became a full adult, he lived here. He was born in Kentucky and spent most of his life in Illinois before becoming president. So we all like to claim in Indiana that we are the ones that shaped Abe Lincoln. We have an entire museum dedicated to him, from where he was living, which isn't too far actually from where Wesley and I grew up.
Yeah, it's like driving distance away.
Yeah, it's not that far. And so, but actually, what the interesting thing about where we grew up from is not specifically my hometown, but where I spent most of my life at when he was born, I believe, was Princeton, Indiana, is an interesting case study in how Southern Indiana became, even though they were Southern sympathizers in the eyes of the U.S., they also were major abolitionists. Like Gibson County, where Princeton is, was actually one of the most major abolitionist underground railroad hubs in the entirety of the Midwest. They actually were a very critical part of the Underground Railroad, which they have an entire
Station.
Yeah. There's Lyle Station is a very big monument to us. It's very big in the sense of how critical it is in the Civil War idea of French black solidarity and freeing the slaves. We were a very critical leg of the Underground Railroad. But not only that, but Princeton is very proud of being, like Gibson County specifically, is very proud of it being a Union elite. So, the things I found about Indiana is that, as somebody once said, do not fuck with the Midwest because the Midwest will fuck with you. And essentially, Indiana is one of the very few states that there was a Hoosier in every single battle of the Civil War. Now, that is very debatable because there's not full records kept on some of them, but what is definitely confirmed is that we are in every critical battle, including Gettysburg, March South, Antietam, Bull Run, Vicksburg. And only that, but we were in the first and the last battles of the war. So, to the point where our Civil War Memorial in Princeton has 4 faces on it, and all 4 faces have 4 battles that are critical to the Civil War movement. Now, my favorite is personally burning Sherman. We had 2 major brigades that Indiana was a part of. 3 technically, but 1 didn't participate because it had a very high casualty list towards the end of the war. But one of them was the Gibraltar Brigade, and this one Indiana regiment actually was one of the few regiments to save the Battle of Antietam because they stood their ground and chased off the Confederates.
Not one step back.
Not one step back. We are the true tankies. Another one was the Iron Brigade, which was a majority Wisconsin brigade, actually. But there was Ohio and Indiana boys in it. And the Indiana boys within it were critical to a very large amount of battles within the East. I don't have any full specifics because it's kind of hard with very bad records, as long as a lot of the records are lost to time. But my favorite is we actually had a brigade that were like, I believe the name was the Tall Boys in the Corn. And essentially, one of my favorite things about military history around this time was all your elite troops were tall, thick boys who could throw a grenade as far as they could or could beat the shit out of you without even trying. And essentially they were literally so tall they could see over the corn to shoot people that couldn't see them because they were stuck in the fields of corn. But this is a great story about this. Indiana contributed 10% of the entire Union Army by the end of the war. In the beginning... Go ahead.
Yeah, like, I was just gonna say, like, while the fucking bougie coastal people just kind of, like, cried, we kicked the Confederacy's ass.
Yes, the Midwest is way more critical support against the Confederates than the New York boys ever will be.
Fucking wrecked.
Fucking dry boys can kiss my ass. But so, in the beginning, Indiana had a set quota of 7,500 people they were supposed to recruit. There are no specific numbers on the first week, how many people they got, but what they say is that within the first day, they had to turn away thousands of volunteers because they had so many they couldn't process them all. So they had beat their quota by thousands upon thousands of people. So by the end of the war, they had recruited 208,000 people of the 2 million people strong Union Army. What's funny is that while the Republican governor was very much a staunch anti-slavery person, the actual state legislature of Indiana was actually a Democratic state legislature. They were Southern sympathizers. Some of them actually had to be kicked out because they were Jefferson Davis sympathizers.
Critical support for the Indiana Great Purge.
So, including one of our other representatives in Congress had to be kicked out, and I believe he's the last person to be kicked out of the Senate ever. I believe, as of 2015, from what I was reading, even though technically by 2019 I don't believe anyone else has been kicked out, but by 2015 one of our senators was kicked out of the of the U.S. Senate because he was a Jefferson Davis sympathizer. My favorite fact, actually. But essentially, Republican Governor Oliver P. Morton. This dude is what I like to call the pro-union Chad. He illegally stole funds from the state government by using personal and state loans to finance the war effort for the Union. Kentucky at the time, as much as people want to think they were Confederate boys, they were actually neutral, which I will have a lot of personal pride about because I'm half from Kentucky, and they didn't care who you were; they hated you. I have to respect. I have to respect. They are essentially who would I go? They're essentially the Switzerland of the Civil War. If you touch them, they would kick your ass. But a lot of the Kentucky boys were actually granted permission by Morton to come into Indiana and form their own Kentucky regiments, which was insane because no other state had done that. If you left Kentucky to become an Indiana regiment, you actually were considered a Kentucky regiment under Indiana control. He was one of, I believe, 13 war governors, including the states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Michigan, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, Rhode Island, Maine, and my favorite weird one is the governor of Virginia, but not the real governor of Virginia. It was essentially a person who was governor. It was a Republican who said he was governor of Virginia, who said that once the war's over, I will take over. So he's a good version of Juan Guaido in Venezuela. What came out of this effort was actually something that Morton had created called the Sanitary Commission. The Sanitary Commission was essentially, how do we make sure less people die on the front? Which actually involved recruiting to about 200 women nurses, including one of the major suffragettes of Indiana history, Mary F. Thomas, and she was actually head of the Sanitary Commission nurses for a short period of time. After the Civil War, of course, we decided that the South of Indiana sucked. Southern sympathizers must die. So post-Civil War Indiana, we actually had a very heavy shift. Even though Southern Indiana was used as a Union basing area to be moving into the South, the population shifted from the South to the North. That was because of Confederate trade with the South being then cut off, or with Southern trade to Indiana being cut off. They could no longer trade with the South. Ports on the Mississippi and Ohio rivers were cut off. They were closed down. So people had to move north to the Great Lakes and the railroad infrastructure that we had already in place, including the canal works. They moved up there, which is what leads to the great disparity between the manufacturing of southern Indiana and the manufacturing of northern Indiana. Because before then, southern Indiana actually had the most population out of the state. And yes, once the ports closed, they moved up. Northern Indiana actually had a very huge economic boom in the 1880s due to what I like to call the natural gas boom, otherwise known as we burned all the gas. At the time of the natural gas boom, Indiana, the field, it was northern to central Indiana. It's weird how they label it. It's more central to me than anything. The gas field was known as the largest gas field in the world at the time. It had the most natural gas, and they actually found oil in it later, but they never were able to get any of it, and this is why. They didn't know how to properly extract the oil at the time, so they just said, screw it, we'll get natural gas. And they piped, I believe the total number by the end of it was 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Which is an insane amount for a state that's not known for it. However, because it was the 1800s, and because Indiana is the most incompetent place I think I've ever met, we burned 90% of our yield in what I like to call the flambeau displays. What they did was, to make Indiana seem cool, at night, they would burn the tops of the natural gas, like, derricks, like, how to get the natural gas out. They would burn the tops of them, so they had cool little stove stacks of fire in the sky. They burned 90% of their yield doing that. That Indiana probably is the main cause of why the atmosphere is now absolutely destroyed.
Critical support for the atmosphere.
The critical support for the atmosphere has been destroyed.
Yeah, this is one of the most polluted areas of the United States. It's not like dense pollution, but like overall, this is like one of the most polluted regions because we're still pumping crap into the air with our massive coal power plants. We'll get to that later.
Yeah. So with natural gas being destroyed, so what happened is there was actually about, I believe, 1 million barrels of oil. I believe is the number. That oil can no longer be acquired. Because how it works is that natural gas keeps a specific pressure under the ground that oil will be able to come up and they can extract it with ease, and they don't have to use very large derricks that are cost inefficient. Because you have to remember, this is all about the capital motive. Also, oil sucks, so we wouldn't care. Isn't it? Yes. So what they would usually do is that they would leave enough natural gas to extract the oil. Well, again, Indiana's incompetent. And 90% of the oil, I like these number coincidences, they're funny to me. 90% of the oil is still stuck in the ground. Because they pumped so much natural gas, the oil has become so deep in the ground they are unable to get it. The only way to get it would be to pump more natural gas in, which is actually so inefficient because the field is still one of the largest fields in existence. They cannot pump natural gas back in to get the oil up. That oil is stuck there until they decide we will waste money to get it. And with Donald Trump, I am not surprised if he will find a way to do it. A big thing that's close to home, back home in Princeton, is cornfields and coal mines.
Oh god.
So coal is something I hate. It sucks. As my crazy government teacher said to me in senior year of high school. He was so confused that when I had moved out of this town that my gutters weren't black. And he asked me, why aren't your gutters black? And I go, well, I don't live near a coal mine in Huntingburg. He goes, oh, you live in Huntingburg. That's funny. And I'm like, yeah, in Princeton. And he's just like, yes, I've lived in Princeton, Mayor. I know what you're talking about. And he goes, yeah, I love it. The coal mines leave black residue all over my gutters. It sucks. It sucks. It's terrible. The railroads made me want to die. Indiana has two things that make me want to kill myself every day. I lived in Princeton, which was the coal mines, which made the air suck. The air was the worst quality of air I've ever felt in my life whenever I was in a certain part of town. And railroads with no overpasses. If you wanted to get from point A to point B, you are going to have to run into a train. But so this all starts with coal being first mined in the 1830s. The main reasoning for this was that we were fueling Ohio riverboats. The riverboats were the main transportation of the time for getting anything that was good in this U.S. So this changed from about the 1850s, where railroads were built in mass production so that they could send their coal everywhere, mainly to Chicago. Chicago was the industrial hub of the Midwest at the time before Detroit fully was. So most of our coal went there. As well as the railroads themselves were also taking all our coal forever. So with that, we make a lot of coal. We essentially when they talk about in modern news what happens to the coal miners, that is the number one question asked in my state when they're like, we can't use clean power because there's coal, and we like coal, and we like our coal miners. However, the only saving grace I have about this is that northern Indiana, where I currently live now, has decided the South is a bunch of morons, and we will make wind power the ultimate power of the future. So there is a place that I like to call, and I believe actually tagged in my phone when I went to take a selfie because I am gay, was creepy wind turbines. It is a massive field, foggy, in the middle of nowhere, with a bunch of corn surrounding it, of windmills that power the entirety of northern Indiana. Now, speaking of the fields, we have to talk about what everybody knows this shitty place for. Corn and soybeans that give your soy boys their fine lattes.
Oh boy.
We make it. We make it. So if we have a civil war, this state will go bankrupt. we will have no money. We will only have soy to have the soy boys eat once they eventually take us over.
Oh god.
By 1920, 25.9% of the state's population was residing on 195,786 farms. All these farms were a mix of corporate farms by the 1920s and a lot of subsistence farming and smaller farms. It was actually a very decent mix, surprisingly. Nowadays, you don't get many of those anymore. They're mostly giant farms owned by one person.
Yeah, fucking colossal.
Wartime food demand during World War I actually caused a huge agricultural boom. However, this was kind of negated by the fact that nobody in Indiana knew what a tractor was. By 1925, 11 years after the start of the war, 7 years after the end, only 12% of Indiana farmers reported using a tractor. Nobody knew what the hell a machine was. They still use their horses and their bare hands, because Germans do as Germans do. So, the invention of the McCormick Deering Farmall General Purpose Tractor, I love that name, because it is absolutely Indiana, making it as long as possible for no reason, allowed people to actually have tractors. So, mechanization happened. Mechanization is amazing, because we essentially did what Khrushchev and Stalin wanted to do to the Soviets, but in a dumb way. We increased our efficiency, and we caused a reduction in land reserve for animal feed, which is the cursed bane of my existence. Animal feed sucks. So with that, we actually stopped growing corn and soybeans for a short period of time, and started trying to grow cash crops. Cotton didn't really work that well. Tobacco kind of worked, but not enough. So most of our cash crops were just dumb versions of corn and soybeans that were like luxury versions, like to make popcorn, of course, praise be sweet corn. But however, with the Great Depression, all hail the death of capital, crop prices plummeted to the point where every farmer was now starving to death. Many small farmers immediately lost their land because they did not have any money to get tractors to be able to farm it. They did not have enough money to pay rent on that land.
Also, a lot of them were in debt from buying their tractor. So, like, the ones that did buy tractors were also wrecked.
So, yeah, essentially, if you were a farmer, you were going to die. Critical support for the soybeans. So, in our area, in southern Indiana, southwest Indiana specifically, there was an abundance of fuel and infrastructure for random reasons. This allowed small factories to open, which turned southern Indiana into another manufacturing center, and especially central Indiana. Central Indiana got a lot of the benefit of northern Indiana with the manufacturing hubs. So we have two things that I like to call the Evansville economic boom, which is why Evansville is now, I believe, the biggest city in the south of Indiana. It's not the biggest city.
They have that river intersection. They have like boats and shit.
They have the river. They have the railroads. They have all this major manufacturing, including, which we'll get to probably later, the #1 production of P-47 Thunderbolts during World War II. We produced them in a Whirlpool factory, which is now abandoned and no longer used.
Yeah, rip.
Praise be 2008 and NAFTA. So the other one I like to call is the Princeton ketchup factory that was killed in a tornado.
Yeah, like we just can't have anything nice in this town.
So Princeton, the town we lived in, had one had a huge major factory down there, and that was I believe Heinz the Heinz ketchup factory.
Yeah.
And that was one of our major manufacturings because we were a small town. And it pretty much employed the entire city, or town more specifically. Most people either worked in the coal mines, farms, or that factory, or they owned their own shops. Yeah, that all came to a crumbling halt when an F5 tornado slammed it and destroyed it for the rest of time. Every time we get something good here, it immediately falls apart.
Oh, yeah, you know what's even better? They actually rebuilt it a few more times, and didn't it, like, burn down twice?
Yes, it burned down 2 more times after they rebuilt it. They were not allowed to make ketchup here, and still don't to this day. So we're gonna go and talk
Spicy
about
tomatoes.
with the death of the ketchup factory. We're also gonna talk about the death of labor in Indiana. So I'm gonna let Wesley run a section real quick, talking about our good old boy Eugene V. Debs, my personal favorite communist hero.
Yeah, so Eugene Debs was one of the early members of the American Socialist Movement. So he was originally a Democrat, like before he was blessed with theory. And he established the American Railway Union, one of the first industrial unions in America. He also got involved in the Pullman strike, which is something we'll probably talk about in a whole nother episode. We're going to give Eugene Debs his own episode. Same thing with New Harmony. Like, those are things we want to expand upon. So, because he was, fomenting revolution, he was thrown into prison. When he was in prison, he read theory, became enlightened, became a socialist. Then he ran for president 5 times.
And I also believe that he is the independent with the highest amount of vote for the longest time. He is for sure, though, the #1 socialist candidate in history in the U.S., and I believe at the time the #1 third-person vote, and actually got second in one of the states. He actually beat, I believe, Taft and Theodore Roosevelt in one of the states, but lost to Woodrow Wilson.
I've got a section from People's History on Debs that I want to read real quick. It was the Depression of 1893 that propelled Eugene Debs into a lifetime of action for unionism and socialism. Debs was from Terre Haute, Indiana, which is a town not that far from where we are.
Yeah, it's only about 2 hours from where I am, and it is. It looks like a mini Detroit almost, except instead of it being this weird fully industrial town, it's half industrial and half college town.
Yeah, we got a lot of weird, like, college towns around here because, like, things used to be here and then everything was gone except the college, so now the college just has to, like, hold it up from the bottom.
Yeah.
I do have a little bit more information here, though. His father and mother ran a store. He had worked on the railroads for 4 years until he was 19, but left when a friend was killed after falling under a locomotive.
That happens a lot around here, actually.
Yeah, like, people kind of just get wrecked by trains because they either
are dumb or they work around them. Also, there is a train. As I love it in Kaiserreich, where they say Huey Long Dong praises every man a king. In Indiana, we say every man gets a train. Whether you want it or not, it will wake you up in the middle of the night and screech at you while you sit on your front porch staring at it as it slowly comes closer to you.
Alright, so Debs came back to join a railroad brotherhood as a hilling clerk. At the time of the Great Strikes of 1877, Debs opposed them and argued there was no necessary conflict between capital and labor, so bad praxis on young
essentially
Debs' part.
The Sochdem before Sochdems.
Yeah, but when he read Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, it deeply affected him. He followed the events at Homestead, Coeur d'Alene, and the Buffalo Switchman strike, and wrote, "If the year 1892 taught the world any lesson worthy of heed, it was that the capitalist class, like a devilfish, had grasped them with its tentacles and was dragging them down to the fathomless depths of degradation. If escape the prehensile clutch of these monsters constitutes a standing challenge to organized labor for 1893. In the midst of the economic crisis of 1893, a small group of railroad workers, including Debs, formed the American Railway Union to unite all railway workers. Debs said, "A life purpose of mine has been the federation of railroad employees. To unify them into one great body is my object. class enrollment fosters class prejudices and class selfishness. It has been my life's desire to unify railroad employees and to eliminate the aristocracy of labor and organize them all so all will he be on an equality.
So Debs is my daddy. Essentially, 99% of any labor movement born out of Indiana / Chicago was based on railroads, because that was practically the only industry we had left, because it kept fucking crashing. What's funny is, in our home county, we actually have what is believed to be the second ever established Labor Day celebration. This was decades before Labor Day was even considered an official holiday, and immensely surprising that southern Indiana is more radical than most of the U.S. at the time. So with labor history, kind of going to the seaside, labor died. Go ahead.
May I interrupt real quick? Because if we do have any actual southern Indiana listeners, I want to list the cities that this Labor Day celebration was in, so that you guys can, like, I don't know, feel some hope from, like, past radicalization. Evansville, Fort Branch, Vincennes, Oakland City, Princeton, Boonville, Washington, Sullivan, and Petersburg. Also, Mount Carmel in Illinois, and Henderson in Kentucky.
Man, I love... What's funny about this is what's going to kind of lead up into this is, in World War II, Indiana wasn't very big. Where the two things about Indiana is we were a manufacturing sector, and we donated a lot of men to the war front. There weren't that many specific Indiana regiments. Not many that gotten too much glory. I may be wrong. Sue me. Nothing that I am too familiar with. We do have a lot of veterans, and I do respect you. Even though you killed people, I do respect you. I go against the line with most socialists here. I do respect you. I wish you would unionize.
Yeah, like...
Here's the thing, though. One of the cities listed there, or towns, whatever you want to call them, Boonville. And it's funny to me about this. Boonville is the home of the Klan in Indiana. Boonville used to be one of the #1 KKK towns in the U.S., and to this day still has a very strong contingent of KKK members, including my roommate, who he is not one, but up until recently, his family was a part of it. May they rest in piss. So
critical support for death.
Critical support for the eventual black lung or cancer they will get. So labor died due to Debs passing away. May he rest in peace, not piss. The breaking of labor and the co-opting of labor by racists who found that Indiana can be and will turn into the Mississippi of the North. So one of my favorite stories about Indiana in this time period is back in the 20s. The mob actually had a very strong presence in Indiana because of Chicago, including in one of my towns I used to actually go to because my grandparents lived there, French Lick. Most of those who know about French Lick know about their water park and the resorts, and it's just a nice little place. Back then, it was mob country. One of my favorite things about the mob was that even though they were terrible people, they did like to murk the KKK. So there was actual outright fights between the mafia trying to kill KKK members because KKK members kept trying to destroy their businesses because they were Italian.
So critical support for the mob?
What's funny is that the KKK is usually known as... It's very hard... Okay, so Wesley, you may correct me, but what religion do you usually think the KKK is? I've always been thinking they've been Protestant.
Aren't they like some kind of Baptist?
That's what I've always found them to be, Baptists. But so, because this is what I'm saying, because I've told this before to people. The KKK hated Southern Indiana people, even though they were from here, because the majority of Southern Indiana by this point were German American Catholics. Catholics didn't like the KKK. They actually hated it because, in the words of one of my relatives, damn it, they lowered the land value. Guys, I love my family. Please don't murk them for being capitalists. But so essentially, that's the Klan there, and the Klan died out pretty fast after the 80s. Now it's not as strong anymore. We were probably one of the biggest people to suffer from outsourcing and the neo-colonialism. Going back pretty far, actually, to the start with the Spanish-American War, which I'm going to let Wesley do a quick excerpt about what Indiana manufacturing used to do for the U.S.
All right. Several years. This is also from People's History.
Yeah, most of the excerpts we're pulling are People's History because most of this information is this first episode's mostly colloquially run from us, shit we've already known, stuff we just refreshed our minds about. The only reason we're pulling People's History is because I had it on hand, and I believe that it is one of the few books of labor intent that really explores Indiana properly. Not much, but enough.
So, all right, I believe this is the paragraph I'm supposed to be reading. Several years before his election to the presidency, William McKinley said, "We want a foreign market for our surplus products." Senator Albert Beveridge of Indiana in early 1897 declared, "American factories are making more than the American people can use. American soil is producing more than they can consume. Fate has written our policy for us. The trade of the world must and shall be ours."
So that was the start. That was the purpose of Indiana manufacturing, was to supply three main things: Chicago, Indianapolis, and the globe, essentially. With the 80s, we actually had a very large outsourcing manufacturing out of the state to the east, to the west, and to the south, and to Mexico and other states around, other countries around Central and the Asian countries as well. But not only that, but we have what we like to call all downhill from here.
Oh Lord, yeah, it's not looking pretty.
It's not. If there's any hope for Indiana, I rested it in Gen Z, as crazy as they are, and how much I hated some of my classmates for being yee rednecks. I do hope that Gen Z does just murk the entirety of Indiana and just turn into a socialist revolution hub.
Because there's nothing else we can do with this.
Yeah. This is why I'm kind of sad that my good friend Drew's not here with us today. He couldn't make it. But he will be here for future episodes, which I can't wait to have that happen. As he likes to describe it, Indiana has nothing, so we turn something from nothing. This has led to us almost dying multiple times from anything we can do to have fun. Essentially, the main activities I did with one group of friends was we hung out at a bridge, we hung out at Walmart, we would go to the movies, we'd go to the woods, and we'd play Risk while emulating dumb historical figures. Essentially, we had nothing to do. We had to just go to the woods and make fun. What Drew and myself had found is you can make fun out of everything that sucks here if you just stop caring what people think and just do whatever the hell you want, which has led to us doing adventures in the woods with guitars and almost getting killed by his neighbors. But we have what I like to call the mega brain drain. So not only did manufacturing leave Indiana, most of our people who go to college here, even though we have two amazing colleges in the state, that are country, nationally, and even in some cases internationally recognized, Indiana University and Purdue University, of which I'm going to the latter. We also have ISU, USI. They're okay schools. They're smaller schools. And then there's, of course, the schools over the river in Kentucky who practically house the other parts of Indiana. But essentially, all those people don't stay here. Because, as I like to say, everything that stays here sucks.
Yeah.
If you can get out of here, get the hell out of here. I'm sorry, Indiana people, but I'd honestly rather this place be an empty field than all of you stuck here and just wasting away. So, one of the biggest things about Indiana as of right now is we are central to the battle to keep coal relevant. Clean coal for everybody. 90% of Indiana coal is actually only used for electric generation. It is only used for coal power plants. We don't do it for anything else, and it sucks. We are slowly killing ourselves, and I'm going to die of coal. Our crops are actually dying, and our harvesting seasons are just screwed because climate change is hell. In other news, it is just now April 8th, and this is the first time spring has actually started. It was snowing less than a week ago. We are going to perish in a hellhole. The biggest thing I like to talk about in Indiana in modern history is Why the hell does Mike Pence exist? Mike Pence, for all those who know him, the rest of us like to call him Voldemort, and his good old friend Mitch McConnell we all call Turtleface.
We just need to do a whole episode on Mike Pence and his misadventures.
Yeah, the misadventures of Mike Pence include
Yeah.
one of the governors that even Republicans hate here, to the point where when everybody saw Indiana people cheering that Mike Pence was now a vice president, it wasn't because it was like the Dan Quayle situation where we were finally glad Indiana had better representation than Benjamin Harrison. It was more the fact that we wanted that asshole out of our state.
Yeah, it's like, oh my god, he's gonna be vice president. He won't be our governor anymore. Yes!
Yes, we were praising the fact that even though Trump was now elected, it meant that, thank God, we do not have him here anymore. One of my favorite things about Mike Pence is his grand idea for his religious freedoms bill that was so bad that the NBA said, we hate you. The one thing important to the state is NBA. We have the Pacers. We have lots of basketball. College basketball, essentially, is the bigger one, though. If basketball doesn't like something, something's gonna change, because one of my favorite things is that he thought it was the greatest idea. The Republicans of Indiana would support this, and everybody would be happy. It was funny because the Republicans of Indiana couldn't care less because they already hated him, and the Democrats of Indiana, as few of us as we are, were trying to just murk him off the governorship. So it actually was luckily struck down pretty fast. He reversed it. So yeah, gay people aren't going to get murdered here. That's the great thing about this place. You won't get murdered for being gay. You'll just be looked at like you're an idiot. To finish this up here. The three things about Indiana that I guess I could say about it that defines us as a region of importance: farms, basketball, and God. That is pretty much. If I could remake our state slogan, it would be that, or we hate the Midwest because we are the Midwest. There's this great thing I love about Indiana, and this is gonna be our ending here. I'm gonna let Wesley do some talking points after me, but we're gonna try and wrap this up. Indiana loves to hate other states. Do you hate Kentucky? We sure do. Do you hate Illinois? We also sure do. Do you hate Michigan? Hells yeah. Do you hate Ohio? Could we nuke Ohio? Do you hate Wisconsin? We forgot it existed. Indiana is just priding itself on hating other states because they exist. Kentucky is the biggest rivalry between Indiana because of basketball and the fact that we are the same exact people. We are the same people, except we have the fields and they have the mountains. We're angry they have more coal than us, and they're angry we have more corn than them. That is essentially what happened to us. And so Indiana is just a wasting away state that, even though we used to be the most radicalized out of every state other than maybe New York and Illinois because of Chicago, and even us trying to claim Chicago for the state, we actually don't have anything anymore except just
Chicago border conflict win?
Yeah, the Chicago border conflict, because Indiana hates Chicago, but they want it so they can make more money. And like the northwest part of Indiana all just considers themselves part of Chicago. It's just an amazing time. But yeah, Wesley, I'm gonna let you finish this out for us.
I do want to interject before I finish. You know how like all these states around here used to be the Indiana Territory?
Yeah, this all was called the Indian Territory.
The Indiana Territory. So, I was thinking, if we do form the People's Republic of Indiana, could we, like, justify claims on, like, all those territories we used to own?
Are we just gonna pull a Taiwan?
Just, like, be irredentist Indiana and just, like, conquer the Midwest?
So, the best thing I've ever heard about this, the best thing I've ever heard about the U.S. is that we aren't one country, we're 50 stupid states. And honestly, if there was ever a civil war, I would love the People's Republic of Indiana to just start claiming things like they're Taiwan. I don't care that it's Mexico, it is rightful Indiana territory.
If you have corn, it belongs to us.
If you have any crop, it is now ours. We will reform the U.S. government under the name the People's Republic of Indiana. I don't care if you're from Michigan, you can shut the hell up. But yes, go ahead and lead us out here.
Well, in conclusion, I'd say that everything that touches the state dies. In the future, we're going to have more people on this podcast. We just did this because we want to get started. Things may be a little rough around the edges. We're probably going to publish this on YouTube, but later on, once we get more people on, we will actually publish this to an actual podcast platform. I also want to give a huge shout out to the guys at Proles of the Roundtable, because it was listening to their podcast and their format that inspired me to get this rolling. If any of you guys are sort of disappointed that we didn't take enough of a leftist angle with this, I understand. Indiana history is, kind of boring.
It's kind of boring and hard to find.
Yeah, it's not very easy to do an ML interpretation of it. And there's so much missing data that we can't really look at it from a historical materialism perspective. Because all the data we got is great names and great dates. So yeah, I'm sorry, Marx, for not doing this properly, but I do think we did the best we could with the information we could pull up. So yeah, I think this was a pretty good start, personally. Hopefully. And next time you see us, we will probably have at least one more guest on.
Yes, we are planning for a second episode, so we haven't gotten a full schedule ironed out because we're all relatively busy. What I'm hoping for with the next podcast is that if we don't have... we're hoping not just the two of us. We have some people we're inviting. Drew is a good friend of mine from high school who I like to call the political quagmire, because he essentially has transferred between politics so many times it's hard to count. But as of right now, I believe I have convinced him enough to become a communist of the Che Guevara doctrine. We also have a good friend of mine, Adam, who's my roommate, who will probably be joining us in the future. He is more going to be our history kind of guy, science kind of guy, exploring Indiana from his perspective as just understanding what it's like to be here. He is not communist. He's very much an apolitical person. So if you want to roast him, go ahead. But yes, he if you ever get angry about us not having enough ML or any kind of leftist ideas, just go murk on Adam whenever he shows up, and we'll be okay with it. I also want to shout out real quick. Proles Pod people, don't kill me, but I am a Chapo Trap House fan. I'm gonna try and cross post this over there as well as you guys. Wesley's told me there's some problems there.
There's a bit of a beef because Chapo Trap House is more of a left com anarchist following, and sometimes they make some pretty hot takes on their subreddit, but it's okay. I believe that there can be peaceful coexistence.
Yes, left unity, guys. But yes, I respect you guys at Proles. I just haven't watched you guys yet. I know it's a sin. But I just want to shout out Chapo for giving me the idea as well of trying to get this started. This is a co-idea between Wesley and I here. This is our brainchild. I want to thank you guys, and if you all want to give critiques, like I said, when this gets posted, it'll be on YouTube, most likely.
Please help us.
And if you guys ever want to talk to us about it, we do have a Discord. We might open up, we might not. If not, we'll try and just communicate with you guys somewhere else. We will, in the description of it, when we get it uploaded, we'll be making a new channel and posting it probably to you guys' subreddits or Discords or whatever. We will probably put an email in there to contact us at if you guys ever want to give us more facts, or you just want to talk about how Indiana sucks.
Yeah, if you guys want to call in, we will actually do call-in segments if we ever do a live episode. Because we really want to talk to Indiana socialists. Because there's no organizations. The closest DSA is in Louisville or Indianapolis.
And both of them are kind of garbage.
Yeah,
the biggest movement,
DSA.
The biggest movement we have in Indiana from a leftist perspective isn't even left; it's the Justice Democrats. It's a lot of. We actually have a very big contingent of Socidems, which, take it as you may, I do have faith in that they'll at least get us out of this.
Here's what I've always said on Socidem: America has set up such a massive propaganda wall against being a Socidem that in order to be a Socidem, you already have to be thinking in a radical way, and I think that because of that, the Socidems are going to get radicalized after 20.
All right, because, before we ramble, I'm going to cut it here. Thank you all so much for listening in, if you do. If nobody ever listens in, Thank you. You all suck. Just
Yeah, that's fine though. I mean, we did this for fun.
Yeah, this is all just essentially for fun. Like I said, we
Yeah.
are willing to take criticisms. So
Please do.
please critique us. Just don't actually roast me and tell me my mother is a whore. I would rather that not happen. All right, thank y'all. Peace. Y'all have a wonderful night.